Perfect. Well, you're all very welcome to join us to this episode of History Club. And I'm delighted to say that we have Rodney Wilson from Missouri, USA. And it's poignant that we're just on the verge of entering our LGBT History Month here in the UK. And as Rodney was the founder in 1994, Rodney was in St. Louis High School and recognized that there were no visible LGBT people and um, decided to do something about that. So, Rodney, you're going to tell us how you founded LGBT History Month and a wee bit of a presentation. Yep.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Joe, so much for the invitation to be here. Joe was on our International Committee on LGBTQ plus History Months, and from the beginning, Mary Ellen Campbell has been on that committee, and we're trying to help History Month projects around the world, encouraging new History Month projects. We meet quarterly. I'll give a little more information about that a bit later on. But thank you so much for the invitation to be here and to talk to you a little bit about some of the experiences in the United States in the 1990s, particularly around education matters, and most specifically around the founding of what we then called Lesbian and Gay History Month in 1994. So give me a chance here to pull up a few images that I would like to share with you. So 30 years ago, last fall, it was actually October the 3rd of 1994. A few dozen University of Missouri St. Louis students, most of us in the history department there, working on a degree in history, took our seats in a small auditorium on that campus, Lucas Hall 100. And we had organized for every Monday in the month of October 1994, I should say 4 of 5 Mondays in October 1994, a film festival. And that film festival was the first ever series of events organized for the first ever, what we then called Lesbian and Gay History Month. 10 films were to be screened on 4 successive Monday nights that October, a little over 30 years ago. 7 of the films were documentaries: Portrait of Jason, Word Is Out, Beyond Stonewall, Silent Pioneers, Common Threads, West Coast Crones, and Framing Lesbian Fashion. And 3 of the 10 films were feature films: Parting Glances, The Killing of Sister George, and on the fourth and final night, the classic from 1970, based on a stage play, The Boys in the Band. With the support of my graduate school professor, Gerda Ray, who served as a mentor to me and as a teacher, who opened my mind to a world I didn't know was even out there, to be honest. We were that night 30 years ago calling into existence a new occasion, an annual opportunity that we hoped in successive years would catch on at other universities and colleges, in secondary schools, and in larger LGBTQ communities, and even in the mainstream. All of our history months, of course, including LGBTQ, exist because someone's history has been left out, and someone felt compelled to try to make things right. And all of our history months, in every location all over the world, can trace their origin story back 99 years ago, when the world's first History Week was organized in 1926 in the United States. It was called originally Negro History Week. It's now called in the United States African American History Month, and in other locations around the world, Black History Month. That very first History Month originated with this man. Dr. Carter Woodson was a historian and a scholar. He was also the son of a formerly enslaved mother and father, and he was the second African American to earn a PhD at Harvard University, the oldest university in the United States, dating back to the 1600s. Dr. Woodson's lifelong mission was writing Africans, and specifically African Americans, into the narrative of U.S. events that previously was dominated by white people, white stories, white institutions, and white happenings. Dr. Woodson believed in the transformative power of history. He believed that knowing the events that preceded one's birth sets the mind free, liberates the spirit, and enriches one's life. His entire life, therefore, was spent unearthing and highlighting African American history. In 1915, Dr. Woodson co-founded what is now called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And in 2016, I should say 1916, he began publishing the association's journal, further pushing the rich history of African Americans into the world of the American Academy. A decade later, in 1926, Dr. Woodson and his associates officially founded what is now Black History Month. He placed the commemoration in February to coincide with the February birthdays of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass and the emancipator President Abraham Lincoln. That month, February, by 1926, already had significance in the African American community in the United States. Shortly after Frederick Douglass's death in 1895, in February, the writer, educator, and activist Mary Church Terrell, who was then serving as a member of the Washington, D.C. Board of Education, suggested a Frederick Douglass Day to be observed every year on the anniversary of his February 14th death. Douglass Day was adopted by African American churches and Black women's groups and others in the Black community of America. So Dr. Woodson's Negro History Week was an extension, in some respects, of Douglass Day, which had been around for 30 years. It's not a coincidence either that Dr. Woodson founded Black History Month the year after his 1922 textbook called The Negro in Our History was banned in 1925 from a Black school in Oklahoma, banned by the white school board that controlled all of the schools in the district, Black schools and white schools. The books were confiscated. The principal at the Black school, a Black man, was fired. But Dr. Woodson did not give up. He believed with his whole soul that every human being has a fundamental right to access the totality of history, their own history and the history of everyone else. As he wrote in 1933 in his most consequential book, quote, "The conditions of today have been determined by what has taken place in the past. And in a careful study of this history, we may see more clearly the great theater of events in which the Negro has played a part." Carter Woodson's Black Studies Association, his books, his scholarly journal, and his commemorative History Week were powerful avenues through which the omissions and the gaps in the historical record of the United States could be partially rectified, primarily for the empowerment of African Americans and secondarily for the corrective education of white Americans. As the 20th century progressed, particularly after the Second World War, a wave of righteous unrest arose among many marginalized groups all over the world, and previously unstudied peoples began to demand inclusion in the classroom, in textbooks, in government, in memory, in museums. And one identity group after another embraced Dr. Woodson's viewpoint that their history is equally vital in the national narrative to that of the majority's history. These newly awakened groups often adapted Woodson's techniques, including history weeks. In 1968, for example, Latinos living in California founded National Hispanic Heritage Week. Asian and Pacific Islander Americans inaugurated their own Heritage Month a few years later. The first Women's History Week was organized in California in 1978. Indigenous groups in the United States in 1986 claimed November as Native American Heritage Month. Many others have done likewise, including Irish Americans, of whom there are about 32 million Americans who name Irish as their primary ancestry, including my mother's Gamble family and my paternal grandmother's Farrell family. All of these groups, from African Americans to Arab Americans, in creating a history month for their own community, are intentionally placing their community's memories on the calendar, jostling their way into the conversation about personal, group, and national identities, challenging the view that history is mostly or only white or male or straight or cisgender or Christian, and calling out narrowly focused academic instruction as social and educational malpractice. So 30 years ago, I was a young teacher in suburban St. Louis, Missouri, in the center of the country, the Midwest. And in my fourth year teaching in 1994, I also became an out teacher. This was the period of my own waking up to a new world, in part because of the graduate history courses that de-emphasized the study of great men and their wars and emphasized the ordinary person, their social movements, and particularly the tumultuous post-World War II period. This whole new world I was beginning to see with my own eyes, however, was nowhere to be found at the secondary school at which I taught. My textbook, for example, a late 1980s edition, was an 800-page survey of the history of the United States from indigenous America through the confrontation with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But queer people did not exist in that textbook. We were not part of the narrative. My scribbled margin note, plus homosexuals, written there in the early 1990s, was all we got in that 800-page textbook. Even though, of course, during those early years of my career in education, the world outside of my classroom was spinning with breaking LGBTQ news practically every day. AIDS, gays in the military, another march on Washington, marriage equality, don't ask, don't tell, a community's fight for survival, gay politics, queer entertainment. Stinging from being written out of my classroom textbook and being denied the context that history brings to contemporary conversations While the world was throwing one story after another at LGBTQ people, in January of 1994, I sent a letter via postal mail to all then known queer organizations in the United States, writing of my desire to establish October 1994 as Lesbian and Gay History Month. I selected October because it's in the American academic year, because October was the month of both the first and second marches on Washington, and because October 11 had been designated National Coming Out Day since 1988. You'll notice there the parallel with Black History Month. Dr. Woodson placed his History Week in the same month that Douglas Day was observed, and I placed this new History Month in the same month as National Coming Out Day. The letter had been mailed to several dozen organizations and people, and happily endorsements came rolling in. A national coordinating committee of highly capable and energetic activists from California to Massachusetts was organized. We gathered resources, bibliographies, essays, and activity recommendations and created a curriculum packet. There was controversy, of course. One conservative Indiana congressman on the floor of the United States House of Representatives shouted that parents should scream bloody murder about this new History Month. The head of a conservative women's group wrote to her followers that, quote, every Christian parent in America will view this official observance of homosexuality as a direct assault on innocent, unsuspecting children. But the idea survived the hysteria. 30 years later, LGBTQ plus History Month USA is a well-established LGBTQ and mainstream community occasion. Last October, for example, Syracuse University put 25 History Month events on their university's calendar. Equality Forum out of Philadelphia since 2006 has recognized nearly 600 queer icons, 31 every October for 19 years. LGBTQ Nation, a well-regarded online news and information site for the community, has published hundreds of queer history stories on their website since 2011. And Southern Illinois University at Carbondale for 20 years has observed LGBTQ plus History Month, last year with 27 events. I was also happy in 2024 to see several K-12 school districts officially recognize LGBTQ History Month, including these in Virginia, Florida, Kentucky, and California. On the right, for example, is a community letter about LGBTQ plus History Month from the superintendent of the Alameda, California School District, published on that district's website. Notice the highlighted portion. Our LGBTQ plus students should always know that we love them, that we hold their futures as vital, and that we will stand with them and support them always. A decade after History Month started in the United States, LGBTQ History Months were founded abroad. History Months now take place in 22 projects around the world, including these: in Hungary, Cuba, Italy, France, the Netherlands, Canada, Finland, Northern Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and so on. In the fall of 2021, emerging out of email conversations with the co-founders of the new History Month Italy, the International Committee on LGBTQ plus History Months was founded. ICOM's first meeting was held in January 2022, and we have met quarterly since, with our 13th meeting about 10 days ago. We are teachers, professors, archivists, documentarians, and activists. We encourage the creation of more history months all over the world to join those that already exist. We were happy, for example, to see Uganda emerge as the 19th History Month in 2022, and we were thrilled to be of some help when the Queer Archives of New Zealand in 2024 organized their first Queer History Month. And we're excited that next month will be the first annual Mace Historia LGBTQIA plus in Spain. We believe that the world is better, stronger, wiser, more whole, and more loving when everyone's history holds a place of honor in the academy, in culture, in our memories and museums. And History Months, precisely as Dr. Carter Woodson planned it almost 100 years ago in 1926, hand a megaphone to precious stories. History is a gift to young people, a narrative in which they can walk, a story where they can write their own chapters. It gives them a foundation, a boost, a shoulder from which to see their lives as part of an endless stream of humanity, not an isolated occurrence around which the world spins. History months are a vocal insistence that we won't be silent again. They are a firm assertion that every human being has a right to their history, to their stories, to their people, just as Dr. Woodson planned it in 1926 and as I imagined it for the LGBT community in 1994. Thank you. And I'm very happy now to answer any question you might have, fill in any detail that you might want, or bring up any question of any kind that you might be interested in hearing an answer to.
Fantastic, Rodney. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for that. That was very insightful. Um, we have two hands. So Claire first.
Tell me this. I see there's only one country in Africa highlighted. What country is it?
Uganda.
Uganda.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, the Uganda rep is working with other nations that are bordering Uganda, trying to bring other nations into the community. We've had some communication with South Africa. They do a huge Pride event every year for quite a long time. They do it in October, so it would be a fine time to make it a Pride and History Month or some such. But at this point, in terms of the African continent, Uganda is the only official History Month. Now, interestingly, there could be others there that we don't know about because we do still learn about new ones that we weren't aware of. Because not we well, one, we didn't have ICOM until 2021, so that we can gather the people, the representatives, the information, and so on. So we just learned, for example, that there is a queer history or queer heritage festival in Haifa every year since 2018, and it's something they do, something they learned about from the United States and the United Kingdom in terms of an annual observance, and they've been doing that since 2018, and this was the first we knew about it about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Rodney. I think sometimes we do things and we don't realize the impact of it with what we do. I've always thought that it's important for us to gather our own history, because if we don't gather our own history, our history is then told from those who sought to oppress us, or take away our rights. So when you were this young, vibrant activist, did you foresee the outcome of your activities?
No, I did not. I I took a Black history class in undergraduate work at a state university in Missouri. And that was my first exposure to Black history. All of the history I had been exposed to involved Columbus, the Pilgrims, the Declaration of Independence, Revolution, Civil War. Yes, there were slaves. That was part of the Civil War, but it was so shallow. And maybe that's the case with K through 12. You can't get as, deep. But that opened my eyes, that course, that Black History course, it opened my eyes to so many things that I didn't know about before. And so I was celebrating in my classroom already Black History Month in February in the US. I know it's in October in the UK, and Women's History Month in March in the US. I was already doing things in my classroom, bulletin boards, presentations for those. And so I just began thinking, because of these history courses I was taking at the University of Missouri St. Louis, all these things I was learning, all these new people, new events that I didn't know anything about. I thought we need something like this for the LGBTQ community. And I didn't know necessarily how to go about that. We didn't have the internet. I didn't. I didn't even have an email address in January 1994. So I looked up the mailing addresses of these organizations, quite likely some of them from the Lesbian and Gay News Telegraph. And I sent a letter off, 2 pages. Here's what a history month is. Here's the history of history months in the United States. Here's why I think we needed a lesbian and gay history month. This is what we would do. Here's why October works, and sent it out, not knowing if I would have responses at all. So I was really surprised to get a lot of responses to that. And then organized that committee that was a national committee so we could really begin pushing the idea. Now, keep in mind that was January, and I was talking about 10 months later, that October, in an age in which we didn't have texting and email and social media. So, frankly, I don't even know how we did it. But obviously, it's really heartwarming and overwhelming that we do have now history months all over the world. And
Rodney, I just noticed during the presentation when you first had started the History Month that there were some like the school board and the governors were saying some really um, scary language. It was they were calling it an assault on innocent children. How did you stay motivated in the face of that as a young
well,
teacher?
I knew, of course, that was not true. I knew that my motives were good, and that what I was wanting to do and what I hoped would happen would be a good idea, would be helpful for all teachers, all students, and all K through 12 schools all over the country and in post-secondary schools. So when you believe that you're doing something that's good and that your motive is pure and that it's an idea whose time has come, you're able to go ahead and push through opposition to that idea. So, when I heard them say, things like threats to children and so on, well, I recognize that language from 1977, Anita Bryant. I recognize that language from 1978, the Briggs Initiative in California. So, history always rhymes, as they say, Mark Twain said. I don't know if he did, but it's good and it does rhyme. And I was aware of that, and aware that eventually, you push through and then you come out the other way, on the other side, to a better place. So that was motivating. And I just believed that what I was doing was the right thing. And I think that energizes a person to go ahead and withstand, stand up against the opposition.
Mhm. So you mentioned Uganda, which I think it's Uganda that's had some pretty awful legislation proposed up to like death penalty type stuff. And I think in many Western identified countries, um, we're in generally pretty good shape, relatively speaking. And I'm just wondering, both on the negative and the positive side, how you see things playing out in the set of countries where that's not the case. And Africa really seems to be the worst right now, but certainly Islamic countries are, it's still, they have death penalty in many Islamic countries for homosexuality. And so they are exercising their activism in environment. I mean, I got active in the late 70s and 80s, and I still had it easier than they have it today. And so I'm just wondering kind of what the nature of your interaction in that context is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What has happened in Uganda over the last 3 years has been horrendous. We have been made aware of it on the International Committee because of the representative that we have. There was a time period where that representative did not want their name used or their image used because there were literally squads of people who were searching out people, people who would inform on people. So it was a terribly difficult time. Now, this person continued doing the work, continued trying to move the conversation forward, continued organizing, spent some time outside of Uganda, obviously, as many people left Uganda, at least for a short time, to try to figure out exactly with what type of strength this new legislation would be enforced and imposed. You're absolutely right, Jim. We have it so much better, even with the difficulties that we do go through in our various Western countries here in the United States right now, the difficulties we're going through. It's far better at this point, and we have it much easier at this point to organize. So we have not had, on our international committee, we have not had any contact from any nation that is majority Muslim, for example, about the possibility of some sort of history month. We do, though, actually have a representative on the committee from Indonesia, which is a majority Muslim country. And that person represents really, it's not an Indonesian LGBTQ history month, but a Southeast Asian history month where various Southeast Asian nations do something. And I don't really know specifically how much is done in Indonesia, but I see things in Thailand and Vietnam, for example, the Philippines during that Southeast Asian recognition. So we have very strenuous work left to do and enormous difficulties in some locations. And what we're hoping to do on this international committee is just provide a resource, a support system, information about how to organize around LGBTQ issues, particularly around educational and academic History Month type issues, and be as supportive as we can to anybody who wants to be part of the group we're creating.